By 3 a.m., or 3 hours into the total invasion as a whole, included in this the battle at Oklahoma City, the Chinese forces of the 58th Group Army had by this point smashed many enemy forces along the flanks of their operation on flank-clearing operations intended to secure vital logistical resupply routes without having to worry about any type of guerrilla warfare harassment. This included the decimating of a fairly large grouping of armed American militia forces in the northwest portion of the metro area, as other flank clearing operations had occurred at the very beginning of the operation, including in the northeast sector and along I-35, which was especially valuable to the Chinese forces in this particular area, as they all advanced on different axes of advance like spokes on a wheel, with their first target primarily being the airbase at Tinker Air Force Base, as heavy strategic bomber aircraft, a pair of H-6Ks and a pair of H-20s, completely leveled and razed much of this installation to the ground as ground forces penetrated the installation and had seized control, as heavy artillery strikes and air raids from the heavy strategic bomber aircraft and precision airstrikes from JH-7 ground attack aircraft hitting pre-designated targets had utterly removed the installation from being what it had been, the primary main air logistical base of the entire USAF. Of course, there were others, but this one primarily was oriented towards the biggest aircraft in the USAF arsenal, as these flanks had been cleared, including an area where there had been a large grouping of 750 armed civilians trying to establish an ad hoc refugee center being carried out by the local paramilitary or sheriffs, essentially. This area had to be surrounded and destroyed as the Sino forces, the Chinese forces in this area of the Sino-Russian coalition, could not allow these forces to harass their supply lines, as the headquarters battalion of the 93rd needed to be able to truck fresh ammunition, food, water, any necessary maintenance parts for the vehicles, and fuel to their frontline combat units, including this one battalion that had been contributed in order to engage and destroy these forces in conjunction with a battalion of mechanized infantry from the 53rd Combined Arms Brigade. These two battalions would continue on their advance to go for their primary target, which at this point was the first of the 279th Infantry Regiment, itself a mechanized infantry formation, part of the larger 45th Infantry Brigade combat team of the Oklahoma Army National Guard. Now, these forces had stuck to their original mission plan, and they had moved in slowly, as it took them a lot of time without satellite information, data transfers, communication, GPS, which many American weapons depended upon, being all gone, as well as communications due to the electronic warfare blanketing, unable to use their radios, as well as anything that was military network-wise hooked into the internet, as their military network was connected to the net and therefore could be hacked. They were completely deaf, dumb, and blind, and they had to take tertiary roads upon crossing the river, entering the area known as Midwest, a suburb of Oklahoma City. And the woods area next to Midwest was approximately where this water sewage treatment plant was, as the first of the 179th had stuck to their original mission plan and was moving slowly and cautiously down different roads as they broke their different companies up and took different roads to get to the facility to make it easier, as at the company level, a company's worth of vehicles was easier to transfer down the line, oral commands and messages, than it was an entire full battalion in one single column, and plus splitting them up made them less vulnerable, as they would be dispersed and not all concentrated in one area, except for when they arrived at the water sewage treatment facility. Early on in the invasion, PLL-05 self-propelled howitzers of the Artillery Battalion of the 93rd had shelled many different groupings of civilians, including assisting in destroying this larger grouping that was trying to establish their ad hoc refugee center, while they had shelled another group which eliminated many but caused the others to flee to link up with these military forces that they were well aware were going to be at this plant, because due to open source intelligence, such as newspaper reporting prior to the invasion, all of these different armed civilians were fully aware that the military forces deployed in the area were going to be deployed in specific areas, and therefore felt that they would have a chance if they somehow could link up with them, as the military forces had much heavier weaponry. They thought they could have a better chance at defending the area. The 1st of the 179th, not to be confused with the 1st of the 279th, also part of the 45th Infantry Brigade combat team, had been camped out at a site that was rented out by the state regime. It was an open lot where they had pitched their tents between the General Atomics plant and the military installation, the Tinker Air Force Base, as they had been drawn into a trap by the Mechanized Infantry Battalion and the Armored Battalion and Combat Engineer Battalion surrounding the installation, letting them in and destroying them before the Mechanized Infantry Battalion captured General Atomics and overran their former campsite, while the Armored Battalion continued north to close in on the city center and provide a part of the outer cordon forces, while the Combat Engineers held the installation, as even the vital interstate of 40 ran through a portion of it, so therefore they secured the area. There was also 240 that ran just to the south, so the combat engineers could control both parts of this road, which was a very important intersection right here. As it pertained to these two mechanized infantry battalions, they had been resupplied, rearmed, and reloaded after their battle here, and were preparing to advance and destroy the first of the 279th, which they knew was arriving at the facility, as their ISR assets, such as their WZ-8 high-altitude stealth reconnaissance drones, and even their lower-level quadcopter squad and platoon and company-level drones were informing them of their positioning at any given moment. They were setting up an ambush and a kill box for these forces to destroy them in one swift stroke, before they would intend on advancing across the river to engage and destroy the 545th Brigade Engineering Battalion, also of the 45th, that was guarding yet another water and sewage treatment facility, with the headquarters of Headquarters Company, or the command elements over the whole 45th, encamped nearby. There was also the 1st of the 180th Cav, as the Chinese cyber arm and intelligence arm had ascertained that they were camped out in this area. They were watching the area, and as of yet, these vehicles had also rented out a warehouse from the state regime, renting out a large warehouse facility, had parked all their vehicles within these warehouse structures, and the ISR assets were steadily monitoring it to wait to see if they were really still there or not. For the moment they pulled out, they would be hit viciously by artillery and missile strikes, including also air strikes. But for the time being, at 3 a.m., these two mechanized infantry battalions were converging on to surround and destroy this American mechanized infantry force of the 1st of the 279th. These battalions were comprised of 8 total companies each. In other words, there was a headquarters company, a fire support company, and 6 mechanized infantry companies, making one full mechanized infantry battalion. The 6 companies would fan out and surround the part of the south, while the 6 other companies surrounded the north, making 12 total companies, with the fire support company and headquarters of each battalion sitting further back, with the fire support companies equipped with their PLL-05 heavy mortar/assault guns, which could be used as a direct fire weapon or a heavy mortar, and their 2 platoons each of each fire support company of each battalion, equipped with the short-range light artillery multiple launch rocket systems of the Type 63 MLRSs. Now, these could be reloaded quickly and fired up to 5 miles, with the PLL-05 self-propelled assault gun mortar having a range of 5.5 miles, and they would play a strong role in supporting their infantry forces on the ground. There would be 2 J-11s doing combat air patrols over this particular area that would also contribute by strafing enemy columns with their very potent nose cannons and dropping a few of their laser-guided munitions, as they were mostly, at this point, this early in the invasion, armed with air-to-air munitions for their air superiority role. For the time being, the attack helicopters had flown back to their CCP property, rearmed, reloaded, and refueled, and the Armed Reconnaissance Helo Battalion, each battalion having 4 flying companies, meaning the attack helicopter battalion had 4 attack helicopter companies. There was a ground-based maintenance company and a ground-based headquarters company, and the recon battalion had 4 flying companies of armed reconnaissance helos. The Z-11WAs were the armed recon helos, and the Z-10s were the attack helos. Both were very advanced helicopters, and the Z-11WA was equipped with a sensor pod for basically reconnaissance activities to acquire information when reconning a battlefield area, as well as a millimeter wave radar for targeting, and they could carry a lot of weapons, and they were light and they were fast. The attack helicopters had a Doppler radome for targeting. And were able to basically see 360 degrees, all manner of targets, and they had a millimeter wave radar for targeting. They had already destroyed armed civilians in 2 instances on the flank clearing operations to ensure that the supply routes were open without harassment, and now they prepared to fly in to cover their ground forces and add their weight to the battle. The Field Artillery Battalion would also throw in its enormous weight, with its total of 40 howitzers between all of its firing batteries of their PLZ-05s of the 93rd Combined Arms Brigade's Artillery Battalion. This battle was a disaster for the Americans. Many, many people were being annihilated in this war, and highways were hotly contested, and scenes like this were very common throughout the battlefield. And mechanized infantry forces just like these, like this platoon led by an infantry fighting vehicle and its 4 armor personnel carriers, Type 89As, would be going into battle against the American mechanized infantry forces. And with their ISR dominance and superiority, such as all of their quadcopter reconnaissance drones, which essentially formed a constellation of real-time battlefield mapping, would aid in missile targeting, and also AI connected to the ISR would aid in AI targeting for the loitering munitions like these CH-901As. All of this was tied together along with combat data links, which were steadily updated in real time by the ISR assets mapping the battlefield in real time, with the artificial intelligence system crunching data in real time, making actions faster and more efficient and safer for the troops than ever before, even allowing them to perform certain actions without having to worry about friendly fire due to precise calculations as far as it related to the combat. Scenes like this were common throughout the battlefield as the ground troops fought savagely against the American forces, who, without communications and ISR assets, were totally blind and deaf and dumb, as the saying goes, and were completely wiped out by the myriad of weapon systems employed against them. Going to the battlefield, the fighting here was heavy and intense, and there were 3 companies just on this 1.5 mile by 1 mile map. Within this particular area, there's a small ridge line with hills on it, as most of Oklahoma City sat on relatively flat ground with gently rolling hills and occasionally some steeper areas, such as this embankment here, this ridge line embankment. This had a steep, roughly 50 feet embankment as it got lower towards this gas station, as there were some roads that ran through the area. This was a semi-rural suburban area that had an industrial park within it. This was once filled with warehouses, as this railroad track runs north to south, And it also has a line that goes under this railroad bridge with this road running over it into this area of the industrial park where warehouses used to be, where freight could be loaded and unloaded. And this building belongs to the railroad. It's the switch house where they can switch the tracks so that trains delivering goods could move along this track and get back on the rails, and the others could come in this way and then leave this way, or they could leave this way, depending on how the rail system was being coordinated at any given moment. These buildings also belonged to the railroad company that operated these rails, these tracks. This area essentially was being covered by the Americans by its Alpha Company, and this was one platoon of the Alpha Company. This was a Bradley, and these were 3 M113s of this one platoon that had already dismounted their troops that at the time ran into these, what were still standing warehouse buildings at the time, and another of their squads running to set up a wedge formation along this road and this rail embankment for protection. And there was a Bradley blocking this intersection here with its troops behind it in a rolling shield double column formation. This was a different platoon. These were 3 M113s, and this was the Bradley for this platoon here of Alpha Company. And this was the other last combat platoon of Alpha Company. This was its Bradley, and these were its M113s right here. All of the troops were dismounted at this time. All 4 squads from this platoon, and from this platoon here. These were armed civilians right here. And also there were a lot of armed civilians rushing into the area, having earlier fled the vicious artillery strikes that had already taken many of their lives, with the rest, approximately by this time numbering about 200, moving into this area, causing additional problems for the now traffic-jammed forces of the 1st of the 279th, as again, without communications, without satellite anything, without the grid, the net, telecom, nothing worked. So they had to do everything by oral message passing up and down the line. So as they broke up into individual companies to make this process a little easier, they still had to move incredibly slow, slinking down the road from their original assembly point. As this company, Charlie, was moving down the road, they encountered a traffic jam as Bravo was moving slowly down this road at the time that they were being surrounded. Behind them, off further up the road, was the headquarters of Headquarters Company, over the battalion, its headquarters company. And behind Charlie was Golf Company, which was from the 700th Brigade Support Battalion of the 45th Infantry Brigade Combat Team. It was the forward support company for this battalion. These were the combat forces, or its rifle companies, consisting of Bravo, Charlie, and Alpha that was on the line of contact right here in this area, this being the line of contact right here. They were holding the area with their headquarters platoon deployed inside of the water treatment facility. As you can see, this is the facility, this is the parking lot, this is the office building for the water treatment plant, this is the water treatment plant itself, its main buildings, where the control rooms and the chemical storage tanks are, and here are all the sediment pools outside, and this pipeline that runs over it on scaffolding is where the chemicals would be pumped through when the grid was still working. But now that it's not working, it has been basically sedentary. It's been doing nothing. It's just been sitting there. But according to the original mission plan, this whole battalion was supposed to move into the area to defend this facility. And they were going to move in and set up positions all around it. And they were beginning to do so with Alpha Company fanning out and taking positions in the industrial park, which was already now heavily destroyed by this point in the battle. As so many things are going on in this battle, and as you can see in this rural terrain back here, this house had been hit and destroyed due to contact. They were taking fire from it, so they just destroyed this house because there were armed civilians in it. Same thing happened to this house along this road here. And there was hilly terrain here and back here. These were the headquarters platoons of this company with its lead vehicles fanning out off the column here. And this company here, this platoon, and this platoon, this was its headquarters platoon right here of this combat company of mechanized infantry. And this was the headquarters platoon of this company. This company here, the third one on this map, has its headquarters platoon further off the map behind this house here that hadn't been destroyed. They were left further back to keep them out of the combat zone, as they were the logistical and command elements of this particular company, like the captain, the XO, the head NCOs, all of that, and the support elements, the supply personnel and fueler and armored recovery vehicle and command vehicles like MRAPs and other things. So basically, the headquarters battalion over the 93rd Combined Arms Brigade had fired a fresh volley of 48 CH-901A loitering munitions. They were all set to AI targeting mode, set to parameters that basically went along with the warhead type that was equipped to them, being the HE warheads. So they were set on parameters to hit personnel and lighter armored vehicles. As if they were equipped with heat warheads, they would generally have their parameters set to destroy tanks and infantry fighting vehicles and even heavier vehicles or reinforced bunkers and things like that. But the HE was like a middle ground between the fragmentation warheads that they could be equipped with and the heat warheads. Although the heat warheads could eliminate personnel, that was a waste of their use because they were made for hardened targets and armored vehicles, like heavily armored vehicles, whereas the HE was good against personnel and some armored vehicles, like armored personnel carriers and MRAPs, because they could come down and crash on top of them and completely annihilate them. And the fragmentation warheads were the best against personnel, as they were designed for the maximum shrapnel effect, and they could destroy light-skinned vehicles like civilian vehicles or unarmored military vehicles like standard trucks or Humvee-type vehicles and things like that are unarmored. Now, as these flew in, they were beginning to hover around the battlefield to pick their targets. There was a pair of J-11 fighter jets swooping down to strafe enemy columns. They were coming down to fire upon the headquarters of headquarters company over the battalion, as well as Golf Company and Charlie that extended up this road back here. They were about to pull up and recircle around and strafe those elements that are off map. Charlie continues off map. This is just Charlie's lead platoon of vehicles right here. It's leading Bradley and 3 M113s and a Bradley behind it. And the rest of the company's off the map up this road. They're in a traffic jam, and all these armed civilians running through this wooded area and this field and back into this wooded area, trying to cross this street here into this wooded area outside of the plant here. They are aiding the traffic jam issue because they're trying to cross at the same time they're trying to get on this road, and at the same time they're slinking slowly down the road. And these civilian forces are gathering here behind this fence. See, this is a neighborhood. This is a street, and this is the house and garage driveway. See, this is a technical right here, civilian technical pickup truck with some guys with rifles in the back and some guys along this fence line, and there's woods here and the ridge line. And there's a bunch of armed civilians trying to run up this way, up and over this ridge through this woods, and try to emerge at the gas station. At the same time, many other things are going on. As this platoon had dismounted their troops, they were immediately shelled by precision artillery strikes called in by these infantry forces mapping this particular area with their quadcopter reconnaissance drones, beaming in the correct coordinates for precision strikes by artillery fire. Now, at the same time this is going on, all of these vehicles are moving up from all 3 of these companies, including this company here. These 2 armored personnel carriers, these Type 89As, are moving up here on this little hill. The VN-20 infantry fighting vehicles moving here. These 2 APCs are moving up here to guard the flanks of this platoon, moving in a straight line up the road to here, before dismounting all of its troops as these 2 armored personnel carriers move up here to provide them some support, while armed reconnaissance helos are firing 57mm rockets and their 23mm gun pods at these armed civilians trying to hide amid the rubble. And in front of it here with these technicals and dismounts, they're all getting annihilated by the 57mm rockets and 23mm gun pod fire from the armed recon helos. Now, there were armed civilians behind this rubble-piled building, too, and these 3 got eliminated by the rocket fire right off the bat, but the rest of these would get eliminated just a little bit later, as there would be a lot of combat maneuvers occurring by these dismounted infantry forces from the mechanized infantry. as these two platoons, led by the VN-20 infantry fighting vehicle of this platoon, with the other platoon following, was moving up this road across the railroad tracks to stop here to fire at these forces. So they were exchanging fire by the time they got here, and this VN-20 moved up a little further, leaving the 4 armored personnel carriers sort of behind this gas station here, where they dismounted their squads on either side. 2 squads went this way and this way on this hill and laid down in the prone position to open fire against enemies over here, while the VN-20 was firing this way and this one was firing this way. CH-901As were coming in at the same time. Heavy mortars, 120 millimeter mortar fire was coming in from the 120 millimeter PLL-05 self-propelled mortar assault guns, and they were landing here and here and here. So it was a dual weapon. It could either be an assault gun or a mortar. And these helos are firing their rocket pods, 57 millimeter rockets, at all of these forces. This became a humongous kill box. But first, as that was going on, the shelling at the opening of this map happened, where it eliminated the dismounted squads of these vehicles here, as they dismounted 3 of their squads. This vehicle across the street that hadn't yet joined them dismounted its squad that ran over here in the wedge. These troops are taking cover amid the rubble here, these former warehouses, with this squad launching their recon drones, and this squad doing the same, and this one doing the same, mapping out these areas in real time, as all of these squads are doing the same thing with their ISR assets, and the helos can see everything with their radars and targeting, and they're all locking onto and firing at targets, firing their AKD-10 laser-guided anti-tank missiles. These were a menace against tanks and heavy armor, and also against buildings, and even to a certain extent bunkers, because they had a heavy penetration ability. And each of these Z-10s could carry 8 of them apiece, as they could carry them on missile racks, 4 on each side. So you also had the 25 millimeter chain gun with the HE armor-piercing ammunition, and you had the 57 millimeter rocket pods on each of these helos. There were 8 of them in just this company here. Eight of these attack helicopters, and then there were 8 of the Z-11WAs right here, and they were armed with a lot of different weapons. They had CM-502KG, dual-purpose anti-tank, anti-ship missiles, which were very powerful. They had a 23 millimeter gun pod, while these attack helicopters had a 25 millimeter chain gun. And they had 57 millimeter rocket pods as well, and 2 HJ-08 anti-tank missiles. So they fired their rockets into this area. Of course, the 130 millimeter towed rocket systems of the fire support companies within these mechanized infantry battalions that these companies were a part of, that were further back with the PLL-05 self-propelled assault gun mortars, were firing their mortars and were about to fire their 130 millimeter rockets into this area, part of this massive kill box. All of these things were happening at roughly the same time as it pertained to the movements of these helos moving into place here and here and here. And these forces moving up here, firing back and forth with this Bradley until the VN-20 fires a 100 millimeter shell and just blows this Bradley away and fires 30 millimeter autocannon rounds and eliminates the dismounts that were behind it too. And this platoon stays here in their position here, while this platoon had its APC on the right, its Type 89A, move up here and dismount its squad of mechanized infantry dismounts, and then the vehicle moved here, and they were laying down fire this way against these forces over here. And at the same time, anti-tank missiles were being fired this entire time at these vehicles, with artillery strikes coming in on them from the artillery fire coming from the artillery battalion. And this was a massive kill box, essentially. This was a nightmare for the Americans, as this VN-20 moved in here, dismounted its squad to clear this building, along with the squad coming from this APC, this Type 89A, dismounted, cleared the building. And they both came out on the other side and took position along the rails, while this vehicle that dismounted one of the squads, this Type 89A, went between these buildings. And they were all taking fire, as you can see by the green around all these arrows, but they were dishing out hellish firepower in return, with the 25 millimeter chain guns laying down ample fire support from the helos, along with rockets and anti-tank missiles flying in. Even CH-901As were up here crashing into armor personnel carriers of the Americans, their M113s. Now, essentially, as all these vehicles had moved up of this platoon and dismounted all their squads, 2 cleared the building and came out on the other side. 1 cleared this building, came out on the other side from this Type 89A that moved here on the very end by the road. You had the VN-20 move up here a little bit further from the middle, moving here. And this Type 89A moved a little further up here after dismounting its squad that bounded alongside of it for a little bit more protection and fired at these troops. As they were finally eliminated by these troops throwing grenades and all the ground fire coming in and the helicopters firing their chain guns, they got up and ran, and they were all cut down. The ones that were even still left got up and ran, and they were cut down by the helos and the ground-based fire all coming in at the same time, 12.7 millimeter machine guns from the APCs. I mean, it just shredded these guys up. I mean, they were gone. And this vehicle here dismounted its squad that snuck in through this hill right here, this wooded hill, and then came over here, but it started to take fire, but they dished out fire on these 2 wedge formations that had originally bounded to take cover along the rails. And a missile fired from this helo here flew in and destroyed this armored personnel carrier, while another missile was on its way to a target. And the CH-901As destroyed the other APCs. There was another anti-tank missile that came in and killed the Bradley, along with the one that also hit another APC that was hit by a CH-901A. They were being hit by so many different things. And this squad bounded out from behind the rail switch building here and took cover along the tracks. But as these squads had come out of the buildings and laid down on the tracks, they were exchanging fire back and forth with vehicle assistance from the VN-20 firing its 30 millimeter autocannon into this area and just shredding these guys up before these 2 squads bounded across the tracks and took position here, while this squad that cleared this building here, besides the other one that joined this squad here, the other one that came out of this building went here with this other squad, then this squad went here, and they were all along the rails right here, while this squad bounded across the rails after these guys had been decimated, along with this squad bounding here before both bounded here. And these guys bounded over here while these guys held the corner, and then these guys peeled around over the tracks, and they both laid down heavy fire this way while the helos are firing down at them from here. And these vehicles were hit by anti-tank missiles, while the anti-tank missiles, rockets, and artillery hit these vehicles, decimating them. And these forces were firing this way. So they were being hit in an L shape by the helos, the ground-based fire from these forces on the hill that could had a little bit better of a view now from up higher. They could fire over the rubble at these guys, and these guys were directing artillery strikes on these forces. This was all happening at roughly the same time. So including with this movement here that was already mentioned, these dismounted troops secured the gas station, peeling around the side of these pumps here, and these troops are moving ahead, while these armed civilians that were coming down this hilly area into this gas station parking lot, they were being hit by CH-901As. They're being hit by heavy machine gun fire from these armor personnel carriers. They're being hit by 23 millimeter gun pods from the attack helos. They're being hit by small arms fire. I mean, they fired a few shots, but they were mostly wiped out before they were even able to really achieve much. And although this lead Bradley fired back at this VN-20 and this one, it was destroyed, and it stuck this whole column in place because now the lead vehicle was knocked out by the 2 VN-20s firing at it. So they were trapped for the artillery strike that was inbound. And these forces, having cleared this area, bounded tactically and covered. They bounded first and watched the corner. Then they bounded ahead after greasing this squad. And as you can see under this bridge here, some of the squad members were under the bridge, and they were a little bit protected from all the heavy fire coming in from the ground and from the air. So not all of them were KIA'd until these squads peeled around and greased them. So even though they were trying to take cover under this bridge, they're completely smoked at this point. So now this squad bounded ahead and took position here, and this one bounded ahead here. And they were both firing at the survivors of this squad that had been taking a heavy beating from rocket fire from these helos and chain gun fire, just blasting all over the place. There were like a couple survivors left, and these guys basically eliminated them and the rest of these armed civilians that didn't get destroyed by the rocket fire from these these Z-11WA armed recon helos that fired rockets into this area, destroying all these technicals and dismounts, including 3 back here. But the rest had lived until these guys came through and finished them off because they were somewhat better protected in all this rubble. But artillery fire was about to come in heavy, and these squads went this way and laid in a line formation along this road in the prone position after they had secured this area, while the other 3 squads of their platoon, one went this way over this destroyed railroad building in this end of this parking lot. This was a building that belonged to the railroad, like this switch building and these buildings here. These were like administrative buildings, offices. They came up over this bridge here and stopped here on the road, and they were starting to take fire from the enemy forces, the Americans inside of the building here. But they had returned fire, and this squad had bounded and took position on the road, fired, and then they all bounded and covered toward the building together as this squad here bounded across the road, took position in this wooded area on the other side, and then they went around to flank the building from this side, and they all stormed the building. They all broke into the building through different entryways and windows, and they began to clear the building of these 3 headquarters squads. While all this was happening, at the very opening of the map, these missiles went in and smoked these MRAPs of the headquarters company of headquarters platoon rather of Alpha Company. Its combat elements at the line of contact here. Line of contact being heavily shelled, hit with anti-tank missiles, AKD-10 laser-guided anti-tank missiles, heavy rocket fire from the 57mm rocket pods. I mean, VN-20 IFV fire from the 100mm cannons and the 30mm autocannons, 12.7mm turret machine gun fire, small arms fire from the ground troops, including Chinese rocket-propelled grenades like the Type 69 with its devastating anti-personnel ammunition or its anti-tank ammunition, and some of them also had man-portable anti-tank missile systems like the wire-guided HJ-08s, which were very devastating. And these troops were basically holding the line. There's a big maneuver, like they were coming around this way to seize the plant and coming up this way to box in this kill box. There were other forces off this map. You have to understand this was only 3 companies of ground troops, headquarters platoons of these 2 companies here. And the headquarters is off map for this company here. There were 3 other companies, part of this 1 battalion coming in from the south. And then from the north, off the map, there was a whole other battalion with 6 more mechanized infantry companies penning in these Americans that unwittingly came into the trap because they had no idea they were being surrounded, because they have no ISR assets, they have no communications. They don't have anything other than what they can see in front of them and what they can spread by commands and information. They were totally in the dark. They were in the same position, or actually worse, than the Iraqis during the Desert Storm Gulf War. They had been surrounded, and they were being hit and barraged by loitering munitions on AI targeting mode, heavy 120mm mortars, which were annihilating groups of these armed civilians, and also hitting right here at this house, which would have destroyed the house and this group of civilians outside of it along this fence area by this wood line. And these artillery strike markers mean that there's an imminent artillery strikes inbound. This went all the way up this street and between them, because this wooded area here, where all these armed civilians were moving into the area from, was about to get heavily pounded by artillery fire from the 155mm artillery shells fired by the PLZ-05s of the Artillery Battalion of the 93rd Combined Arms Brigade. And the very few that made it down the hill and got to engage in combat were slaughtered by the crew serve weapons, the small arms, and the gun pod fire from the armed recon helos, and even rocket pods being fired at some of them. This was extremely hellish. This was a nightmare for the Americans. Now, as these troops held the line here while these others advanced and took the plant, by the time they seized this plant and annihilated all those inside who tried to fight back, they kicked in the back door and ran through the sediment pool area and raided this building here. And by that time, all the fire coming in and that destroyed all this, they were being engaged from this way, and these armed civilians coming around were being fired upon by so many different things. They ended up surrendering. This squad here, and the command elements and these armed civilians that entered this area that was taking fire, they all ended up surrendering by the time this plant was captured and these forces came through here and came out the back. They put their hands up, they got on the ground, they gave up. I mean, because by that time, the thunderous cacophony of heavy mortar strikes landing all throughout the area, 130 millimeter rocket strikes hitting all through up and down the area from the rocket platoons of both fire support companies of each battalion were striking this entire area with 130 millimeter light artillery rockets, heavy 120 millimeter mortars. 155 millimeter artillery was raking this area up and down. I mean, this place was decimated. I mean, this place was pounded into dust, as well as all these loitering munitions flying in. There were a total of 48 loitering munitions, and most of them went for all of these vehicles in these two columns. This was Bravo Company, Charlie Company. Lead vehicle knocked out. They got stuck. They were already in a traffic jam. They were gone. The J-11s flew up and down, strafing the columns as artillery shells pounded, as mortars pounded, as CH-901As pounded the area. I mean, it was over. I mean, they were completely blown into the next life. I mean, it was horrible, horrifying. These VN-20s contributing also by firing their 100 millimeter shells from their main guns, their 30 millimeter autocannons, 12.7 millimeter machine gun fire coming from the vehicles up on this hill firing over this way. I mean, they definitely had the range. This is only a 1.5 mile by 1 mile map, and from this hilltop, they had excellent range at these columns. And the helos, they fired enormous volleys of rocket fire from the rocket pods that hadn't as of yet been fired, from the Z-11WA armed recon helos, the Z-10 attack helos. I mean, they were laying down enormous firepower, and they blew this entire battalion into the next life, including all of the armed civilians that were trying to put up a fight with them. They didn't even stand a chance. It was over. And these two J-11s, even though they were mostly armed with air-to-air munitions, besides strafing, they also dropped a few laser-guided precision munitions on some of the vehicles in these columns that were now trapped and completely deadlocked. I mean, they were in a gridlock. They were deadlocked, and they were destroyed. They had no way of knowing that they had been surrounded until it finally all came upon them, as that was the way this modern warfare worked. These forces had all of the advantages. They had ISR superiority, AI superiority, technology superiority. This is real life. These forces are real. These weapons are real. These consequences are real. Anti-satellite weapons, the Dongning 2 and 3, are real. S-500 is real. They produced enormous amounts of all of their weapons. The numbers of the Chinese military numbers are real. They are enormous. Their aggregate numbers of equipment, it's all been heavily upgraded, including all the new, fresh, brand new platforms being churned out at enormous rates, make China have by far the most massive tank fleet, most massive armored fighting vehicle fleet. Increasingly, their helo fleet's been expanding rapidly. They have the most combat aircraft on Earth. They have the biggest navy on Earth, most technologically advanced, hands down. Biggest, most advanced missile forces on Earth. Only Russia comes close. China is enormous. They are the world's most powerful nation. They have the most advanced technologies. They lead in AI. They lead in drone manufacturing by far. Vehicle manufacturing by far. They are massive. This is real life, real consequences of this type of warfare, where AI, new weapons like anti-satellite weapons, cyber warfare, electronic warfare weapons that are stupefyingly powerful, working in tandem to deny the enemy any information on the battlefield, while they have all real-time data, real-time everything, real-time updates. AI constantly crunching information in various domains and dimensions, spitting out answers in seconds, guiding forces, making them fight more safely than ever before, mitigating friendly fire incidents, allowing them with precise calculations of certain weapons and how they function to be able to carry out maneuvers never before attempted in warfare or possible before. That is what AI can do. It was incredible, the technology utilized. Brand new weapons platforms like the VN-20, even the slightly older but still very new ZBD-04 was highly advanced. Z-10, highly advanced. Z-11WA, extremely potent weapons platform. CH-901As, produced in stupefying quantities, able to be fired in large quantities at a time. Of course, there were also FPV drones, with certain FPV drone operators, typically in the special forces elements. They were also devastating in their own right. Robotic forces, operated by combat engineers, special operations, within the PLA, and of course, other certain specialized forces, all working in tandem to crush the enemy with incredibly potent artillery firepower, too, on top of everything. Most longest range artillery, most powerful artillery, the most artillery, tied with Russia in artillery, but the longest range artillery, most powerful artillery, most tanks, most armored fighting vehicles, most combat aircraft. China was enormous, and the ability for them to churn out weapons at a rate never before imaginable is real. These forces were crushed, and the infrastructure had been captured. As the mechanized infantry companies advanced and achieved their objective of destroying the entire 1st of the 279th, entrapping and destroying them in a massive kill box, as they prepared for their next operation to attack the 545th Brigade Engineering Battalion. Other forces were achieving other moves throughout the battlefield, with the Mechanized Infantry Battalion moving up through the center, also of the 53rd, like one of the battalions involved in this action against the 1st of the 279th. With these forces destroyed early on during the flank clearing operation, these 400 armed civilians, before they moved and prepared to assault the 2nd of the 134th Infantry Regiment, which was an airborne National Guard battalion, one of the rare aspects of the Guard. Most of the airborne elements were active duty forces, but the Guard had a few. They prepared their assault and were to assault the area also by 3:30 a.m., just as this battle here was coming to its end, as it lasted 30 minutes. As they prepared to seize this area and engage whatever remained of the horribly battered from 300 millimeter rocket fire and 152 millimeter artillery shell fire, the badly battered 2nd of the 134th, the airport was being captured also at roughly the same time, as the headquarters and air defense artillery battalion of the 17th Combined Arms Brigade were moving in to seize control of the international airport from its lightly defending forces. This battle at the Will Rogers International Airport will be explored in the next video of the hypothetical invasion documentary series of the South Central invasion sector of the USA. Texas, predominantly, but Oklahoma and New Mexico as well, as external components smashed their way inland, racing up key invasion routes, supported fully by the Trojans, the most integral aspect of fourth-generation warfare was the concept of the Trojan horse shock armies. Their ability to rapidly seize control of their target areas, allowing for the movement of heavy reinforcements, was integral to the success of the entire operation, nullifying the enemy's capabilities to be able to defend themselves by striking them within their own homeland, making it impossible for them to get aircraft airborne, as their air bases would be overrun or heavily missiled and artillery struck, making their army useless, as the army bases would also be overrun, and any deployed units rapidly entrapped and destroyed due to a lack of communication and ISR capabilities, as had been done to the 1st of the 279th and many other units throughout the nation at this exact time as the war raged on, the 4-day total invasion of the USA. The nation was becoming smashed. There was nothing the Americans could do about it, as the Sino-Russian coalition was about to achieve total undeniable victory over their greatest foe, as they had designs on this nation for a very long amount of time.